Suzy Lamplugh was a 25-year-old aspiring real estate agent living in London. Described as a lover of life, she had a propensity of living every day to the fullest. Suzy was just starting what seemed to be a promising future. But after making an appointment with a potential client on July 28, 1986, Mr. Kipper, to show a property on Shorrold's Road in Fulham, she was never seen again. Suzy's Ford Fiesta was found parked by another property up for sale on Stevenage Road, which was 1.5 miles from the appointment address, Shorrold's Road. Police compared the DNA of over 800 unidentified bodies, but none were a match to Suzy. In the year 2000, convicted murderer John Cannan is questioned, but never charged with Suzy's murder. Cannan was charged in 1988 for the slaying of Shirley Banks. By this time, Suzy had been declared legally dead, even though no body had been found. During the investigation of Shirley Banks' murder, it would be revealed that John Cannan had a specific nickname in prison, Kipper. This was the same name that Suzy wrote down in her appointment book as being the name of the person she would meet the day she went missing. Kipper is also another word for herring, maybe a mocking message to the police that the false name given was a red herring for investigators. After 5 female prostitutes were subsequently killed in Suffolk, police interviewed the Suffolk Strangler, Steve Wright, in May of 2007, as he actually had worked with Suzy in the early 80s, but he too denied involvement. To date, no viable leads have turned up, and police have said publicly that they still believe Cannan to be the killer. As Suzy went missing around the same time as John Cannan's crime spree, and Suzy, like Cannan's targets, was a professional woman. On the evening of December 26, 1986, just one day after the Christmas celebrations, Patrick Warren and David Spencer were out on a late-night stroll in Chelmsley Wood on the outskirts of Birmingham. Warren and Spencer were riding Patrick Warren's brand new red bicycle, which had been a Christmas present. The boys had been spotted by a police officer earlier that afternoon, playing with another group of children in Meridian Park, where they had been warned by the officer to not play on the frozen pond. After returning home, they told their parents of their plans to visit one of Patrick's brothers that evening. Derek Warren, another brother, went looking for them the next day when he found out that they had never arrived. The last known sighting of the boys was just after midnight by a petrol attendant who gave them a packet of biscuits. Patrick Warren's brand new red Apollo bicycle was found abandoned by the petrol station near the trash bins. The petrol station attendant said they saw the boys walking towards the local shopping center. That would be the last time that they were ever seen alive. Soon after, the children were reported missing. Officers still speculated to reporters that the boys were playing some big game, or that they were simply staying with friends. They were not taking the missing children seriously. Police offered €500 to anybody with information, believing that whomever the boys were staying with would quickly give them up, but no one called in any viable leads. In an effort to raise awareness, the supermarket Iceland utilized the techniques of an American ad campaign, which placed the pictures of missing kids on the backs of milk cartons. This would make the faces of David and Patrick present in 770 stores across England. However, no tips were ever proven to be credible. One major possibility is that Brian Field, who was living mere miles from where the boys went missing, was somehow involved. He would have most likely utilized the same petrol station at which the boys were last seen. Brian Field was later convicted of the rape and murder of a Surrey schoolboy, Roy Chittill, which happened in 1968, but with no bodies and no direct evidence leading to him, Fields has never confessed or even been a prime suspect, largely because he was never investigated. All of the sex offenders in the area were questioned but ruled out. To date, the boys have never been found. Families' houses have been searched and investigated. The property of Brian Fields has been investigated as well. Rewards have been offered, ponds have been drained. There are no leads. The police consider this a no-body murder. A religious and naive housewife in need of a job, Josephine Backshall posted an advertisement in the local newspaper that used the phrasing, quote, "anything considered," end quote. Being a wife and a mother of 3, this 39-year-old housewife believed she was being recruited to model cosmetics when a man named Pier telephoned her. This man would go on to speak with Josephine via telephone and subsequently would come to photograph her on the front lawn of her house. Josephine told her husband that this man was, quote, "of a good sort," end quote, and that she seemed to trust him, though she had no actual reason to. Josephine had made an appointment with this man to meet and discuss her potential job as a cosmetics model. They went to a pub called the Fountain Public House in Good Easter at the late hour of 10:30 p.m. 3 days later, on November 1st, she would be found with her hands tied and her neck strangled. Surprisingly, there was no sign of sexual assault, although some acts can leave no trace. She was found fully clothed in a pond on Bury Green Lane in North Bishop's Stortford. The only person to recall the two was the owner of the public house, who recalled the unusualness of the shifty male companion of Josephine's, who was so tall that his head brushed against the hanging beer growlers. Upon autopsy, it would be revealed that her last meal was Chinese food, though from where it was unknown. Her watch stopped at 8:15 p.m., although on what date it is unknown. Though an arrest was made in 2014, the man was subsequently released on bail and has never been re-questioned. Police have reached out for the public's help, but so far have received no credible leads. During the second half of the 1990s, English television presenter and journalist Jill Dando was one of the BBC's best-known personalities. She was the host of numerous TV shows, including Crime Watch, a documentary series that presents dramatic reconstructions of unsolved murders. Ironically, Dando would later become the victim of an unsolved murder and would be featured on the show that she herself used to narrate. On the morning of April 26, 1999, Jill Dando left her fiancé's home. Traveling by car, she went shopping and then to her own house in Fulham. She approached the front door and she was shot dead. Her body was discovered around 14 minutes later by a neighbor. Jill was rushed to the hospital, but she was declared dead on arrival. Forensic investigations found she had been shot by a 9mm caliber automatic pistol with the gun pressed against her head at the moment she was shot. Pressing the gun against her head would have silenced the fatal shot and prevented her killer from being splattered with blood. Police struggled to find any evidence leading to her killer, though they believed her murder was the work of a deranged fan. Eventually, their attention focused on Barry George, a local man who was obsessed with celebrities, guns, and women. George was a lonely stalker with a collection of 4,000 photographs he had taken of women he had seen on the streets. He claimed that he was the cousin of Freddie Mercury and allegedly held a grudge against the BBC because he believed they covered his cousin too negatively. Despite his insistence that he was innocent, George was initially convicted of Dando's murder in 2001 based on flimsy evidence about a speck of gunpowder residue found inside his pocket. But on August 1st, 2008, after a second appeal, George was exonerated and released from prison. The residue in his pocket, the court reasoned, might have come from somewhere else. Furthermore, the murder weapon had never been recovered, and George had been ruled intellectually incapable of being able to carry out the crime. To date, the crime still hasn't been solved. It led to widespread speculation. One theory was that Dando was targeted as part of a revenge crime for a story she had investigated herself on Crime Watch. Others believe she'd been the victim of a professional assassin, hired by someone who wanted her dead. Another suggested she'd been killed by the Serbian mafia. This was the time of the Kosovo War, and Dando had presented a charity appeal on behalf of the Kosovo refugees. She later received a letter from a Serbian source condemning this action. Also, the NATO bombings of the Serbian TV headquarters had taken place 3 days prior to Dando's death. It was theorized that she may have been killed by Serbian extremists in retaliation for the charity appeal or even for the bombing. The case remains open and unsolved. A Welsh mathematician who dropped out of his graduate studies in order to join England's Secret Intelligence Service agency, codebreaker Gareth Williams was known for being intensely dedicated to his job on the clock and uncommonly private while off the clock. Williams' work primarily concerned researching and tracking cash flows from Russia to Europe. After not being in attendance at work for 7 days, concerned colleagues contacted police out of concern for William, age 31, as he was a man of habit and never absent, especially without warning. By the time police performed a welfare check on August 23, 2010 at Williams' flat in Pimlico, London, which was an SIS safe house, he had been dead for 7 days. Williams was found stripped of clothes in a red North Face duffel bag, which was padlocked from the outside. The key to the lock was placed inside the bag under his body. The heater had been turned up and the rate of decomposition rapidly increased due to the warm air, greatly reducing the ability to test for toxins or swab for DNA. It was determined by the coroner that Williams had died of a lack of oxygen or an overabundance of carbon dioxide as a result of breathing out in the bag but not having fresh air to breathe back in. The coroner would speculate that the lack of bruising and the manner of death indicated that he may have been alive when put into the bag. There was no DNA on the handles of the duffel bag or on the edges of the tub. No fingerprints or even smudges could be detected. This further indicated a cleanup after the fact. Williams was last seen alive on August 15th, but not reported missing until August 23rd. There was a 5-hour window of unaccounted for time between when Williams' sister notified the GCHQ of Williams not answering any calls and when police were actually notified, which some believe might be indicative of a cover-up. Dr. Fiona Wilcox, the medical examiner on the case, ruled the death as, quote, unnatural and likely to have been criminally mediated. She chastised Scotland Yard for failing to classify Williams' death as a murder, instead only classifying it as, quote, suspicious and unexplained. Her ruling relies partially on the fact that she hired 2 forensic investigators to replicate the scene, and in their 400 attempts they could not get into the bag and then still be able to lock it from the outside. From the beginning, the interagency scrambling led to missing items and scene contamination. Prior to the police investigators cataloging the scene, all of the house's locks and door handles were removed, and other unknown items may have been removed as well. Unfortunately, their strongest lead was DNA present on Williams' hand. For many months, the DNA was investigated, as the lab had coded it as being unidentifiable. But later it would be found that this supposed key piece of evidence was simply contamination from the crime scene investigation team that first responded to the body. As that was the only DNA sample found, the realization would be a blow to the investigation as no other leads existed. To outside observers, it would seem obvious that Williams' death was not an accident at all, but some background evidence focused on by critics of the investigation attempt to throw into question the highly private spy's sexual proclivities. Williams' old landlady testified that her husband and she were awoken by Williams' screams one night, and after rushing to his bedroom, the landlady found Williams tied to the bed and unable to escape. He apologized profusely and said that he had tied himself up just to see if he could escape and that he would never try something like that again. Whether this act of tying oneself up was sexual in nature or the research of a spy about to be operationally deployed is unknown. The self-asphyxiation angle is furthered by rumors of Williams visiting websites that featured bondage, and some critics of Williams say that that predilection could have led to an interest in erotic confinement, which could have led to Williams attempting to tie himself up on the bed, as the landlady found, which could have led him to trying to confine himself into a bag. A far-fetched theory, indeed. However, this angle is vehemently ruled out by the medical examiner, who insists that this is not a case of autoerotic containment or asphyxiation. Dr. Wilcox, the coroner, however, does not believe that any sort of autoerotic asphyxiation was involved, and that, since Williams was, quote, a scrupulous risk assessor, any attempts to get himself into the bag would have been combined with his possessing of a knife for escape. Another angle focuses on multiple Russian embassy cars parked in the vicinity of Williams' house just days prior to his death. As Williams' work was primarily centered around Russian criminal activity and money laundering, he was understandably a target. Additionally, the method of killing is consistent with Russian intelligence modus operandi, poisoning with an unknown biochemical agent. Boris Karpichkov, an ex-KGB agent that served for more than 10 years and ranked as a KGB major, and who is now in the UK's version of witness protection, has a new identity and tells the real story behind Williams' death. While it most certainly wasn't caused by Williams' sexual proclivities, it did involve the KGB blackmailing him with scandalous photos in order for him to become a double agent. Allegedly, Williams was befriended by a fellow GCHQ colleague named Orion, who was actually a double agent for the Russians. Orion introduced Williams to a third party with whom Williams supposedly had a friendly connection. This Lucas wined and dined Williams, but later spiked his drink and took him to a separate location where he was filmed next to a man and woman who were supposedly in a scandalous position, the specifics which are unknown. Once Williams had come around, the compromising footage was then used as blackmail for Williams to also become a double agent, but this attempt was unsuccessful and the two parted ways. But before leaving, Williams made it clear that any more attempts to blackmail him would result in Orion being reported to MI6 as a Russian double agent. On August 16th, Lucas came back to the flat and somehow drugged Williams in order to kill him. This would prevent any further threats to the valuable Russian mole in GCHQ, who to this day is only known as Orion. Outrageous and fear-inducing assassinations, used to deter other detractors to the Russian cause, are a common way to die for anyone associated with the Russian KGB. Alexander Litvinenko, a Russian agent who received political asylum in the UK, was killed in London just 4 years earlier using a rare radioactive isotope. Inspector Sutton postulates that, quote, if the motive for Gareth's death was around his job, then poison becomes much more likely. End quote. The former KGB agent Karpichkov speculates that having Williams' body displayed in such a scandalous way was meant to send a message to future people refusing to become double agents. Despite all the evidence to the contrary, and most likely bowing to pressure to close the sensitive case, London police determined in November of 2012 that Williams, alone, probably got into the bag himself and couldn't get back out again. It was the summer of 1992. Both Helena Andersson, 22, and her big sister, Ulrika, had temporarily moved back to their parents' home in Maristead. On Saturday evening, June 13th, they went to a friend's party in Torrebora, just under 2 miles from Maristead. The party was successful. The company never wanted it to end, so they went to Maristead, where they continued the evening at the city hotel. Ulrika decided to go home, but Helena stayed a little longer. The next morning, Ulrika enters Helena's room. The bed is untouched and the light is still on. Ulrika's first thought is that Helena may have stayed at her friend's house, but a few hours passed and she hadn't returned home. Ulrika becomes worried and calls her friends, but no one knows where she is. The police are called. After searching, the police discover Helena's shoes and rings, which were found on a bicycle path near the home. The police also found fresh car trails. A woman said she heard screaming near Helena's home. Witnesses also heard a car drive down from the site at high speeds around the same time as someone else reported hearing the screams. Thousands of people have participated in the search for Helena, and the police have put down a lot of resources to solve the case, but so far they have not been able to find Helena or her body. Lili Lindström was a prostitute living in the Atlas neighborhood in Stockholm, Sweden in the 1930s. The 32-year-old entertained clients in her small, dingy apartment and spent the day of May 4th, 1932, working. That evening, Lili dropped into her neighbor Minnie's apartment in search of condoms before returning to her own home. On May 7th, 1932, she was found dead in her apartment after her friend Minnie alerted the police that she had been missing. She had been dead for 2 to 3 days before police broke into her apartment. She had suffered blunt force trauma to her head. Lili was discovered naked, face down on her bed. Her clothes were found folded on a chair next to the bed. According to reports, sexual activity had taken place, with a condom found to still be protruding from her backside. Nothing was taken from the house. Furthermore, saliva was found on her neck and other areas of the body. Most disturbingly, almost all of her blood had been deliberately drained from her body. A blood-stained gravy ladle was found near her body, and it is believed that the instrument was used by the killer to drink Lili's blood. Due to this, the unknown killer was labeled as the Atlas vampire. Up to 9 suspects were questioned about the murder. Most of them were her clients, but they were all ruled out as the perpetrator. After that, the case went completely cold, with not a single suspect or any other trace of the Atlas vampire ever turning up. The murder remains unsolved to this day. Catrine De Costa was last seen on June 10, 1984. She was a heroin addict and a prostitute who worked in what used to be a very well-known area for prostitution, Malmskillesgatan, Stockholm. When Catherine's mom hadn't heard from her in a few days, she grew concerned and notified the police. On July 18, 1984, some of Catherine's remains were found near the Department of Forensic Medicine at the Karolinska Institute. Then, on August the 7th, more remains were found less than a mile away from the first location at Carlsberg's Beach in Solna. Her head, internal organs, one breast, and genitalia have never been found. She had to be identified through fingerprints. A cause of death has never been able to be determined because of the missing body parts. A man by the name of T. Tarm, who worked at the Department of Forensic Medicine near where the body parts were found, was initially suspected. He was known for frequenting prostitutes, with one alleging that Harm had been violent to her. Additionally, Harm's first wife had died in a potentially suspicious way. It was actually her father who tipped off police to Harm's potential involvement. In December 1984, he was arrested for the murder of Catrine. and his first wife. Days later, he was released, with no charges being brought against him. In the meantime, a general practitioner named Thomas Algen was accused of sexually abusing his 17-month-old daughter by his wife. When those claims were unsubstantiated, she then alleged her daughter had made comments suggesting that she had seen Cataline's dismemberment. A child psychiatrist and psychologist found the claims of the then 2.5-year-old to be credible. Harm and Algen had previously worked together and vaguely knew each other. During the latter stages of the pretrial investigation in the autumn of 1987, a married couple who owned a photo shop close to the Karolinska Institute contacted the police. They said that years before, in the summer of 1984, they had developed and processed prints of a film roll that contained horrible images of a body cut into pieces. They and their employees had apparently been very upset by these pictures, they said, but didn't notify the police of their existence. The owners told police that the customers, 2 young men, had claimed that the pictures were part of a top-secret investigation. The Photoshop owners were shown lineups with the 2 doctors, and they identified Algen and, to a lesser extent, Harm. Harm and Algen were arrested and brought to trial in 1987. At the end of the murder trial, the jury returned a guilty verdict at the district court. However, before the verdict could be confirmed by the judge, a number of jurors gave interviews to the press. As a result, the High Court overturned the conviction and ruled that the 2 doctors were free to go. A campaign was led by a journalist who knew Cataline, and a second trial was ordered. This time, Harm and Algen were acquitted of the murder. The judge did believe that Harm and Algen were guilty of the dismemberment, but by that time the statute of limitations on the dismemberment had passed, leaving him unable to sentence them for that crime. The statute of limitations for the murder passed in 2010. The case officially remains unsolved. The port city of Gothenburg has always been Sweden's gateway to the world. This was especially true in the decades following World War II, when the rebuilding of Europe created a huge demand for Swedish wood, steel, and industry products. Guy Carlson, 22, Jan Olof Dahlsjö, 21, and Kjell-Åke Johansson, 16, were 3 friends who found work in this environment at shipyards and industries. They were loyal and trustworthy to their friends and families, but were also known to get into trouble with the police for minor crimes. Sometimes they carried surprisingly large amounts of money. They were last seen on the rainy Thursday morning of July 29, 1965, driving a midnight blue Volvo PV 444 that belonged to Jan Olof Dahlsjö's brother, even though none of them had a driver's license. All 3 of them were reported missing at different times, and it took months until the police could confirm that they disappeared at the same time. They had salaries waiting for them that were never collected. All of them had girlfriends, and Kjell-Åke, the youngest, even became a father shortly before the disappearance. They had been heard to be planning on going to a camping trip together in the village of Åsa, south of Gothenburg. But the weather was especially bad that day and not suitable for camping, and they didn't tell anyone that they were leaving on that particular day. Extensive searches in and around Gothenburg have found nothing. In addition, the same day in 1965, a 4th disappearance occurred in western Sweden. The 4th person that went missing from Gothenburg that same day was Hubner Lundqvist, 18, an art student from Stockholm. He spent the summer of 1965 with his family at their summer residence in Torekov in the south of Sweden, but got bored and said that he wanted to travel to Lysekil, north of Gothenburg, where a collective of artists resided. The path to Lysekil goes through Gothenburg, and he either hitchhiked his way there or took a train. He left his family on the morning of July 29th and arrived in Gothenburg sometime during the day, where he sent a postcard to his parents that read, "All is well, don't worry." This is the last trace of him. The parents of Hübner, Hime, Lundqvist, the missing art student, always believed that he left the country to work on the high seas. 2 Swedish sailors have reported speaking with a young Swedish man of similar appearance in the late 1960s, once in Singapore and once in Australia, but these sightings have not been confirmed. The fact that Hübner Lundqvist disappeared the same day as Guy, Jan-Olof, and Kjell provides speculation that both the cases are linked. But Guy Carlson's sister does not think that the friends from Gothenburg have something to do with Hübner Lundqvist. Another very widespread theory is that the disappearances are paired with the so-called Godman's robbery that took place the same day as the 4 people disappeared. The robbery was committed by a group of friends originating in Hungary. They were all 3 much older than the other missing young people in the PV. Police, reporters, and amateur detectives have tried to connect the 2 cases for more than 50 years, but all attempts have failed. Nobody knows what happened to the 4 young men who disappeared that fateful day in 1965, and their disappearances, along with the aforementioned murders, are some of the few unsolved mysteries of Sweden. Lee Hyung-Ho, who lived in a Hyundai apartment in Apgujeong-dong, Gangnam-ju, Seoul, was last seen at 5:30 p.m. on January 29, 1991, in the apartment playground. He was in the elementary school 3rd grade. At that time, according to a friend of his family, he witnessed a man talking to Lee. The friend went inside the apartment for 10 minutes, but when he came back outside, the boy and the man were nowhere to be found. That night, a man placed a threatening call to Lee's parents for a ransom of 70 million won for Lee's life. After that day, he called over a period of 43 days, over 60 times. The kidnapper first called and pretended to be a policeman and asked for another detective on scene in order to find out if they had called the police. But when the father responded that it was only his family at home, the suspect hung up. According to a voice analysis of the phone call, the man was estimated to be in his 30s. Later, the suspect called and asked for money to be dropped off at specific places throughout Seoul, but each time he never showed up to the location and was most likely watching to see who arrived. One time, after a money drop was supposed to happen, he called the household again and said, quote, "I told you not to bring anybody. No police," end quote. Each time, he called from a public phone to avoid being traced. Finally, he requested a bank transfer, but when the money was transferred to the bank, he quickly transferred it to another bank and then tried to withdraw the money from that bank. However, he was hesitant and ran away without the money. Unfortunately, no CCTV cameras were installed at the bank branch at the time, and since at the time it was possible to open an account without an ID, the kidnapper had used a pseudonym to open the bank account. There were also no fingerprints on the application form. When the kidnapper found it difficult to receive money from his bank account, he sent a final note to Lee's father and told him to put 100,000 won in a steel box near the Han River Bridge. Lee's father discussed it with police and decided to put fake money with some real ones in the steel box. The detectives were lurking around the bridge, but they confused the position of the steel box in the process of communicating it on the radio, and the kidnapper got away with the money. That night, the kidnapper called Lee's father and said, quote, "There is a lot of fake money. I guess you do not want to get your son back. However, I am grateful that you did not report to the police," end quote. 1 month after the last call of the killer, on March 31st, 1991, a child's body was found in a drainage channel next to the tunnel near the Jamisil-han River Park. It was later confirmed to be the body of Lee Hyung-Ho. The police made thousands of copies of the voice tape of the killer and distributed them nationwide to no avail. Lee Hyung-Ho's murder remains unsolved. Sergeant Billy Ray Hargrove was a soldier who served in the Gulf War. His platoon was sent from Germany to Saudi Arabia and had been active in Operation Desert Storm. However, the conflict ended before their platoon saw any action. Despite this, Billy recommended his platoon for a merit award, a medal that he felt like they deserved. However, his superiors declined the recommendation. Billy then decided to forge his superior's signature on the appropriate documents. A short time later, his men received their medals. In June of 1991, he arrived in Korea for another tour of duty and was arrested at the airport by military police for forgery. Around this time, his marriage to his Korean wife Kim was also falling apart, and he planned to divorce her. On February 20th, 1992, Billy missed a summons to report to duty. Even after one of his fellow sergeants informed him that he was late, Billy never reported. Kim said that Billy instead took his dog for a walk that day. Shortly afterwards, Kim found Billy's body hanging from a tree in their front yard by an elastic parachute string. A suicide note was found in his pants pocket. It read, in part, quote, "My life is really screwed up now, and I just don't know how to fix it. I've been thinking a lot about taking my life for a long time now. Goodbye." End quote. Billy's family and Mike Carmichael, a fellow soldier and Billy's friend, did not believe the handwriting on the note was his. The Army acknowledged that the note might not have been in Billy's handwriting, but they still ruled his death a suicide, stating that he was depressed because of the upcoming court-martial and the upcoming divorce. From the autopsy report, his family learned that Billy had cuts and abrasions on his face, hands, and knuckles. His mother believes that someone fought with him leading up to his death. Billy's friend, Mike Carmichael, accompanied his body back home for burial in Arkansas on March 4th, 1992. On the same trip, Mike visited his uncle, Oscar Carmichael, in Nuevo, California. According to Oscar Carmichael, his nephew told him he did not believe Billy had committed suicide and that he would do his own investigation into Billy's death. 2 weeks later, on April 4th, 1992, Michael Carmichael was found dead in Korea. Before his death, when Mike returned to South Korea, he and his wife, Sung-hee, visited Billy's widow, Kim, to collect his belongings. Mike learned that Billy had written a letter to his father, but it had never been sent to him. His father believes that the letter would have helped them determine what really happened to Billy. Mike continued to collect Billy's papers and stored them with his own papers in a metal box. Mike told his uncle Oscar that if anything were to happen to him, Oscar should immediately open the box. But Mike never said what was in it. On April 3rd, 1992, Mike, his wife, and his friends celebrated his 38th birthday. At 10 p.m., he received an unexpected phone call ordering him back to the base. By the next morning, he was found dead. He had been strangled by a parachute cord strung from the door handle of a metal locker inside his NCO quarters at an army barrack. Like Billy, he too had abrasions on his face and a gash on his forehead. And, like Billy, he was strangled by a parachute cord. Within a few days, the Army ruled his death a suicide, claiming that he was depressed over financial matters and over Billy's death. Mike's family does not believe this. Mike and Billy's family have joined forces in searching for the truth behind the two deaths. His uncle, Oscar, believes that Mike was too happy to commit suicide, as he and his wife had just gotten married. He believes that the similarities are not coincidental, and that the two friends' deaths are connected. Like Billy, Mike died after he was summoned back to work on an off-duty day. Both men were found hanging just inches from the ground. Both had been tied with a parachute cord, which is highly elastic. Mike's death seemed especially bizarre, as he was sitting on the floor against the locker. It seemed to be a very odd and difficult way to commit suicide. The metal box that contained Mike and Billy's personal papers was sitting on a desk across the room from Mike's body. The box of letters later disappeared. No one knows what happened to it, and military personnel deny its existence. Both families now believe that both men were murdered and that their deaths were covered up by the army. Chun and Choi Sung-hee were a newlywed couple who got married in November of 2015 and lived on the 15th floor of an apartment building for 6 months in Busan, South Korea. Choi was a theater actress, and Chun had a restaurant business with a friend. In early June, Choi's father tried to contact the couple to send them some nutritional supplements, but he couldn't reach them. He then went to Chun's restaurant and asked his friend. The friend told him that Chun hadn't come to work since May 28th. Choi's father, now worried, notified the police. Police found no evidence of a home invasion or signs of a struggle inside their apartment. The couple's mobile phones, wallets, ID cards, passports, and laptops were also missing. There were groceries on the dining table, untouched. Dirty laundry, leftovers, trash were also still there. Their dog, who recently had had surgery, was still inside the apartment, unfed and with its feces all over the place. Choi was well known for taking good care of her dog. Choi was last captured on the 28th of May on CCTV footage in the apartment's elevator, carrying groceries at around 11 p.m. 4 hours later, at 3 o'clock, Chun was caught on CCTV as well. Both of them went to their room on the 15th floor. After this, no one knows what happened to them or how they left the apartment. In the apartment building where the couple lived, there were 22 CCTV cameras. However, no footage of them leaving their home was caught by any of the cameras. They simply disappeared into thin air. Choi's co-worker later came forward and told police that on the night of the 28th of May, Choi had sent her a text that she wasn't feeling well and would not be coming to work. Choi's co-worker felt that whomever sent these texts was not her by the way the sentences were structured. When the co-worker tried calling her, her phone was switched off. On the 31st, Choi's husband called the co-worker and told her that Choi wouldn't be coming to work for a while since she had been admitted to the hospital due to an overdose on her prescription medications. He also told the co-worker that she wouldn't be able to answer any calls or texts. Later in the investigation, though, no local hospitals had any record of Choi ever being admitted during that time. It was also found that Chun had done the same thing. He too had texted his restaurant partner, saying that he had something he needed to do and that he wouldn't be coming in for a month or two. On June 2nd, police traced the husband's phone to Gyeongsang County, Busan, before losing the signal. The wife's phone was last traced to Cheongho Dong Seoul, 400 kilometers, 248.5 miles, from the husband's phone, located later in the day, before losing the signal completely. The couple was rather quiet. They did not have any debt and had average insurance policies. Their credit cards, cell phones, internet records are still quiet to this date. Savings of about $27,000 is still in their account, untouched. Later in the police investigation, it was found that Chun had another cell phone, which he used to talk to his ex-girlfriend, Yoon Mi-jin, even after his marriage to Choi. After Chun and Yoon broke up, Yoon married another man and began tormenting Chun and his new girlfriend as they planned to wed. After Chun and Choi got married, he maintained contact with Yoon. By this time, Yoon had divorced her husband, remarried, and was living in Norway. Police looked at Yoon's movements around the time of the disappearance. Yoon had arrived with her second husband to Korea in May of 2016, just before the couple went missing. But she left for Norway 2 weeks before her planned departure date in early June. During that time, she never used her credit card or contacted her family. Police discovered that just before returning to Korea, she had persuaded her mother to send her 10 million won for a, quote, trip to Africa. Police contacted Interpol, and Yoon was arrested in November of 2017. However, she is still in Norway to this day and has decided to appoint a local lawyer, so it will take a long time for Yoon to come to Korea before they can question her about the disappearance. Choi and Chun remain missing to this day. On June 6, 2005, a man collecting cardboard from a trash heap discovered a large and heavy object stuffed inside 2 conjoined burlap bags and tied with a rope with a unique knot in Sinjeong, Seoul. When the man opened the bag, he found the body of a woman with a black plastic bag over her head. The victim was identified as 20-year-old Kwang Yang. Autopsy concluded that she had died of strangulation. She had been raped, and 2 sanitary napkins and toilet paper had been inserted into her vaginal area. Semen was also found at the crime scene, but the killer could not be identified. Then, on November 20th, 2005, a second victim, Lee, was found by a parking lot only 1.8 kilometers from where the first victim had been found. The body was wrapped in white cloth and tied with a rope with the same knot that was found with the first victim. And, like the first victim, the body was found in a garbage dump site and had died of strangulation. Both victims had their hands bound together with rope. Due to the unique knots used, the police believed the killer could have worked a job that had to do with packing or wrapping. No DNA of the killer was found at the crime scene or on the second body. On May 31st, 2006, at approximately 12 p.m., a woman riding a taxi got off on Sinjeong Station. As she was walking towards the station, a man abducted her. The woman, Pak, was held up against a knife by the kidnapper and led to a basement room. She shouted and resisted, and when a passerby asked if everything was all right, the man said that she had drank too much alcohol. Pak was blindfolded before entering the basement room, where there was another man, possibly an accomplice, who tied her hands. After a while, the kidnapper went to the bathroom while the other was out of the room. Seeing her chance, she somehow took off her blindfold and tried to escape. She took refuge behind a shoe cupboard on the second floor of the building. She stayed hidden until she felt like the man had stopped looking for her. As the criminals went out to look for her, she ran away and found an elementary school where someone called the police for her. Pak told investigators that she did not remember where she was, but did remember that there was a sticker of a cartoon character, Mashimaro, on the shoe cupboard. Based on this, it was suggested that a child in preschool or lower elementary school might be living on the second floor. She also remembered the 2 men talking, and one laughed that she was going to die. The abductor is described as being a bit chubby, having a height between 175 and 176 centimeters, with bushy eyebrows, and was in his mid-30s at the time. After this incident, the perpetrators, who felt the risk of arrest after the victim escaped, seemingly decided to stop. There have been no leads in the case since then, and the killers remain unidentified. Florina Simion was a 25-year-old girl from the small town of Hasgrove in the province of Venice, where she lived with her family. She had a history of drug addiction and had a problem in her right leg, which caused her to limp. She also suffered from epilepsy, for which she was taking medications. Florina worked at the Giuliani Middle School in Dando as a janitor. At the school, she met 56-year-old Maurizio De Grandes. Both got into a relationship soon after. Maurizio would persuade her to stop attending Cazzari Association in Dando, where she would regularly go to seek assistance for her drug addiction. On February 26, 2016, Florina would leave her house at 7:30 p.m. in order to celebrate her boyfriend's birthday with him. She exchanged some text messages with her boyfriend, Maurizio, who told her that he was going to have dinner and would call her later. She then called her friend Agnès. Both would talk on the phone for some time before Florina would abruptly hang up the phone. She would then send strange, incomprehensible messages to her boyfriend in repeated Italian words that made no sense. Maurizio called her back as soon as he saw the message, but no one answered the call. The next day, when Florina didn't arrive back home, her family reported her missing. Strangely enough, Maurizio never notified her parents or the police that Florina was missing. The police launched a massive search for the missing girl. Interestingly, Florina was not carrying her medications for her epilepsy with her on that day, even though she'd kept it with her at all times in the past. In the days before her disappearance, it had rained a lot, and because Florina had a problem walking, police believe that it is possible that she slipped and fell into the nearby river, Brenta, and was carried away by the current. Divers searched the Brenta River, but to no avail. The only lead that police could find was that Florina's phone was last active in the town of Dolo, which was around 7.5 kilometers from her home, around 8 p.m. The police would only search for 3 days before calling it off, stating the girl had run away. However, her parents do not believe this. Her mother believes she was killed. She stated that before her disappearance, Florina was threatened and beaten several times by a man who was interested in her. Florina had rejected him multiple times, and once he had reportedly threatened her with a knife. Florina's case had not gained much attention, and it remains unsolved to this day. Her mother continues to search for answers. Pier Paolo Pasolini was an Italian film director, poet, writer, and intellectual. Pier remains one of Italy's most controversial public figures due to his blunt style and focus on some of his works on taboo, intimate matters. Besides being a gifted film poet and intellectual, he identifies himself as homosexual, Marxist, and Catholic. In the early morning hours of November 2nd, 1975, several weeks before his extremely controversial film Saulo, or The 120 Days of Sodom, was to be released, Pierre's mutilated corpse would be found on a beach in Ostia. He had been run over by a car several times. An autopsy concluded that he had multiple broken bones, and his private parts were crushed by a metal bar. His body had been partially burned with gasoline after his death. Just a few hours before Pierre's body was found, police had arrested 17-year-old teenage male prostitute Giuseppe Pieno Pelosi for speeding in an Alfa Romeo. The police also accused him of stealing the car. When the stolen car was determined to belong to Pierre, Giuseppe confessed to his murder. Giuseppe told the police that Pierre had picked him up for sex on the night of the 2nd of November, 1975. He first took him to a restaurant and then to a beach. Pierre had then asked Giuseppe to do something personal having to do with a wooden stick, but when Giuseppe refused, Pierre snapped and struck him with the wooden stick. In self-defense, Giuseppe grabbed the stick and struck Pierre in the head, hitting him in the private parts and then beating him to death. He then fled in his car, hitting what he thought was a bump. Giuseppe asserted that he acted alone. Giuseppe was convicted for Pierre's murder. However, Pierre's friends, family, and fans were not convinced. They thought that the brutality of the crime was impossible to have been committed by one thin 17-year-old boy, and that the attack was carried out by more than one person. Furthermore, there were several contradictions in Giuseppe's confession regarding the crime scene details. A green sweater was found in the car that belonged neither to Pierre nor Giuseppe, and a bloody handprint of Pierre's was found on the roof of the passenger seat, but there was barely any bloodstains on Giuseppe. Some motorcycle riders and a car was seen following Giuseppe in the Alfa Romeo before he was stopped by the police. Then, 29 years later, on the 7th of May, 2005, Giuseppe retracted his confession in a televised interview, claiming he was innocent and had confessed under the threat of violence to his family. He said that 2 brothers and another man with a southern accent had killed Pierre, calling him a, quote, queer and a dirty communist as they beat him to death. In 2005, evidence would be uncovered that suggested that Pierre had been murdered by an extortionist. A friend of Pierre, Sergio Sicci, launched his own investigation into his death and concluded that some of the rolls of film from Saulo, or the 120 Days of Sodom, had been stolen, and Pierre was killed while negotiating with a group of thieves. It was thought that he was possibly killed by members of the notorious Maliana gang. In 2014, DNA samples taken from the clothes that Pierre was wearing on the night revealed traces belonging to at least 3 different people. Giuseppe was released on probation in 1983. Following his initial release, he was arrested on a range of charges from drug dealing, illegal possession of drugs, and thefts to bank robberies. Over recent years, he had been running a bar in Tistaccio, Rome. More recently, in 2017, Giuseppe passed away at the age of 59 due to lung cancer. Pierre's murder remains shrouded in mystery to this day. Wilma Montessi was born in Rome in 1932. She came from a modest background, though she dreamed of becoming an actress. She was engaged to Angelo Giuliano, a policeman, and had planned to get married on Christmas in 1953. On the 9th of April 1953, Wilma's mother, Maria, and sister, Wanda, decided to go to the cinema. Wilma declined their offer to join them, as she was not keen on watching films featuring Anna Magnani, and said that she probably would go for a walk instead. Around 5 p.m., Wilma left her house and headed to the San Paolo train station. When Maria and Wanda returned home, Wilma wasn't there. Wilma did not arrive home for dinner that night, and her family reported her missing to the police. Strangely, she left her ID card at the house and wasn't wearing jewelry that her fiancé had gifted her, which she usually wore when she went out. Her family later claimed that she had no knowledge of public transportation. However, it is certainly plausible that she had access to the information necessary to cross town. It is unclear whether she was on the train or not, but a few witnesses claim to have seen her board the train from Rome to Ostia. She was then reported to have been seen at a cafe near a beach in Ostia. The owner of a kiosk selling postcards located near the beach claimed to have spoken to someone who looked like Wilma and said that she bought an illustrated postcard and intended to send it to her fiancé in Potenza. 2 days later, on the 11th of April, 1953, her body was found on the beach of Tor Vaianica, near Rome. She was lying face down in the sand, was partially dressed, and wasn't wearing her shoes, skirt, stockings, or garter belt. An autopsy determined that she wasn't sexually assaulted. No traces of drugs or alcohol was found in her system. Police quickly ruled her death as accidental. According to the police, Wilma went to dip her feet in the water in order to relieve herself of the itchiness that her eczema on her heels was causing. They said she took her shoes, socks, and garter belt off and then dived in the water when she must have suddenly fallen ill. She then fainted and finally drowned, they claimed. The coroner said her sudden illness was because she was menstruating. A few months after her death, a newspaper called Attualita published an article that claimed her death was not an accident. A Roman actress named Adriana Concetta Bisaccia claimed that on that day she had participated in an Eyes Wide Shut style soiree with Wilma at the nearby estate of Copacciato, which was owned by an elderly nobleman, Marquess Ugo Montagna. Wild parties were a regular thing at the property and were attended by women hoping to become actresses. Adriana said that afterwards, Wilma overdosed on opium and passed out, after which she was dumped at the beach, where she was left to die. The paper's editor, Silvano Muto, was charged with spreading false and tendentious news to disturb public order, and was taken to court. Adriana, frightened, denied her declarations. To support his claims, Silvano then brought in the Milanese aristocrat Maria Augusta Gallio, who was a former mistress of Marquess. Maria said that Wilma had taken her place as Marquess's mistress and alleged that Marquess ran a drug ring along with his musician friend Piero Piccioni, the son of a foreign minister. She also claimed they were behind the disappearances of a number of other young women, and that the local authorities had been bribed to keep things quiet and to close the case. This testimony caused an uproar in the public, and both the foreign minister and the chief of police, Savario Polito, resigned from their posts. Public opinion regarding the case was polarized. Marquess, Piero Piccioni, and the chief of police were all tried for their alleged crimes, but all three were later acquitted. Silvano was sentenced to 2 years in jail for slander, while Adriana got 10 months, and Maria was sentenced to 2 years in prison. It is unknown what happened to Wilma that night, and her death still remains unsolved. Simonetta Ferrero was a 26-year-old woman who lived with her family in Milan. On Saturday, the 24th of July in 1971, around 10 a.m., Simonetta left her home to run a few errands for her upcoming 2-week family vacation in Corsica. At 10:37, she went to a bookstore in Corso Magenta to buy an Italian to French dictionary, and she probably then went to exchange lire to francs. At around 11 a.m., she went to an upholstery shop to drop a piece of fabric off in Corso Vercelli. She then goes to a perfumery, where she buys some cosmetics and leaves around 11:30 a.m. She had an appointment at a beautician, but would never make it for her appointment. Her family waited for her at lunch around 1 p.m., but when she didn't arrive home by 4 p.m., they reported her missing to police. On Monday morning, the 26th of July, at about 9 a.m., a 21-year-old seminarian, Mario Torzo, was walking through the corridors of Cattolica University after attending an 8 o'clock mass. On his way, while passing by a woman's bathroom near the stairs of Block G, he heard water running from an unclosed tap in the bathroom. Since he was in charge of the management of the bathrooms and dormitories in his seminary, he got agitated by the wastage of water and went to the bathroom to turn off the tap. As he entered into the bathroom, he noticed the door handle was covered in blood, and there was blood on the floor and on the door itself. Nearby, he found Simonetta lying on the floor in the middle of the bathroom, covered in blood. Horrified, Mario immediately notified the custodian, and the police were called in. An autopsy concluded that she had suffered 33 stab wounds, 7 of which were fatal. Her body was clothed, and there were no signs of sexual abuse. Her gold jewelry and money were found on her. Nothing was taken. She had wounds on her hands, suggesting she had fought with her attacker and had grabbed the knife with her bare hands several times. Bits of the killer's skin was also found under her fingernails. A bloody handprint left by the killer was found on the wall. Using the handprint, the police determined the killer was likely between 5'9" to 6 feet in height. The coroner determined the murder took place somewhere between 12 a.m. and 2 p.m. on the 24th of July. It is unknown why Simonetta had gone to the university that day, given that she had graduated from it 2 years earlier. 2 theories were put forward by the police. First was that she had gone to the university to use the bathroom. However, it still doesn't explain why she went to the bathroom on the block G rather than using the one near the entrance of the university. The second theory put forward was that she had gone there to grab a brochure for a friend on the Faculty of Law. However, neither of the theories have been confirmed. Police questioned the people present on the campus on the 24th of July. The university was empty except for 4 construction workers who were working on the first floor and the custodian. The workers said they worked with jackhammers, which probably drowned out the victim's screams. The workers worked from morning to 1 p.m., had lunch, and then resumed to work until 5 p.m., after which the custodian closed the university for the weekend. None of the people present had heard or seen anyone entering or leaving the premises. Mario would be considered a suspect early in the investigation, but would soon be cleared. Investigators also followed a lead about some men who had harassed the female students at the university, but nothing came of it. Investigators looked into Simonetta's personal life, but couldn't find anything. She was a serious, hard-working girl, and did not have a boyfriend, nor did she have any enemies. Police have followed several leads over the years, but so far nothing has turned up. There have been no suspects in the case, and it remains unsolved. Leonarda Polvani, also known as Leah, was a 28-year-old woman who lived near Bologna, Italy. She was a jewelry designer and had been happily married to a philosophy teacher for about a year. On the evening of the 29th of November, 1983, Leah went to visit a friend at around 5 p.m. in Bologna to show her some jewelry. Leah and her friend then visited another friend's house and spent some time there. Leah left her friend's house at around 7:15 p.m. with her car. This was the last time anyone saw her alive. Leah wouldn't return to her house that night. At 9 p.m., her concerned husband called his in-laws to check if they had seen Leah. They had not. He called several family members and friends, but no one had seen her. Her husband then decided to go and look for her. He opened the garage door and found Leah's car in the garage. The engine was still warm. However, Leah was nowhere to be found. Leah had apparently disappeared in those 5 meters which separated her garage from her home's door. At 11 p.m., her husband called the police and reported her missing. The police immediately launched a search party for her. 4 days later, 2 gamekeepers came across Leah's body while patrolling an area in San Lazzaro di Salvina, on the opposite side of Casalecchio di Reno. Her body was found in a cave. There are various caves in the area, but the one where Leah's body was found had been closed to the general public, as it's filled with a colony of bats and is the most isolated of all the caves. This cave is also known to be used for drug and arms trafficking. Leah was found half naked, face down on the gravel. Her bra and tank top were torn, and her sweater and jacket were pulled up over her head.
She was naked from the waist down, with her shoes, trousers, and socks thrown nearby. She had a shoelace tied around her neck, suggesting that the killer or killers had tried to strangle her, but she was eventually shot at point blank in the heart. She had no defensive wounds and was probably killed on the night that she disappeared. The gamekeeper said that the barbed wire and the chain that protected the cave were cut by a tool, suggesting that the killer or killers had already planned where they would be taking the victim. During the police questioning, several witnesses said that they had seen a dark-colored Fiat 128 outside of Leah's home on the day she disappeared. One neighbor said that there were 3 to 4 men inside the car, and at one point, one of the men got out of the car and checked the list of names on the doorbell of Leah's home before getting back inside the car and leaving. The car was seen again later that night, and a neighbor saw 2 men arguing inside the car. However, none of the witnesses ever saw the faces of the men. The next day, a car that matched the description the neighbors had given of the car seen the night prior was found set on fire in Pilastro. The car was found to be stolen from Bologna a day earlier. A few hours after Leah was found, 3 calls were made to the police. The man on the phone said that he had seen a car idling in front of the cave on the night Leah disappeared, and said that he remembered the license plate number. The man would call again just to make sure they got the information. He would call for the 3rd time and added a few more details. The car was found to belong to the owner of a club, who told the police that Leah was killed because of something related to her jewelry work. The man was then brought in for questioning, but would retract everything. The witnesses that lived near Leah did not recognize him as any of the men that they saw lingering in the car the evening that Leah disappeared. With no evidence against him, the disco owner was cleared. After 2 years, a drug dealer was arrested for another murder, and he told police that he knew who had killed Leah, and he gave 3 names to the police: Angelo Albanio, already in prison in Germany where he had been for the last 12 years, Moreno Pisci, and Carmelo Lopez. However, it was found that the drug dealer was confused and had described another murder that had happened a year prior to Leah's murder in a nearby cave. All 3 accused men were put on trial, of which Moreno and Carmelo were acquitted, but since Angelo was in a Germany prison and Germany refused to extradite him until after he had served his sentence, he was not acquitted. 19 years later, he was finally tried and acquitted as well. In recent times, a DNA test on Leah's clothes and belongings showed traces of only female blood, and no other traces of DNA was found. There have been no suspects and no leads. Her case remains open and unsolved.
Elli Immo was a 20-year-old woman who lived with her mother and 3 brothers in Kemi, Lapland, Finland. She studied at the Kemi School of Economics and worked part-time as a business assistant in the wallpaper and paint trade. On December 7, 1955, Elli went out with her friends Mila and Annalisa to the city center. The 3 went to the Makatruva Cafe and did some window shopping afterwards. They then went to the Valio bar. At around 9 p.m., Mila told her friends that her feet were freezing and it was time to head back home. Elli and Mila lived close to one another. They said goodbye to Annalisa and headed home together. Along the way, 2 teenage boys, about 12 to 14 years old, offered to escort them, but the girls turned the boys down. The 2 walked along Lapintai Road and reached Elli's home. Mila, however, asked Elli if she could walk a little farther with her towards her home. Elli agreed and walked 250 meters with her to Lapintai Road and Riski Kon Kato intersection. Both parted ways, and Elli headed back to her house. She would never make it back home. Elli's mother returned home from work shortly before midnight. The front door of the house, which led to the downstairs and the upstairs apartment, was unlocked. However, this was not unusual, as the neighborhood was considered to be safe. The upstairs apartment was occupied by a tenant. Elli's brothers were sleeping downstairs when her mother arrived home. Elli's bags, containing her school books, were on the living room floor, and some of her books were on the table. Her mother figured Elli had studied before heading out.
She wasn't worried that Elli wasn't home this late at night, as she sometimes spent the night at Annalise's home. The following day, at 12:50 p.m., however, a schoolboy found Elli's body next to Lappentai Road. She was found just 30 meters from her house. She was found face down, and her body was partially covered with snow. An autopsy revealed that she'd been struck in the face and stabbed several times in the neck and behind her ear. She had not been sexually assaulted, and there was no sign that robbery was a motive. Elli had been wearing her gloves, which were now stained with blood, as Elli had ostensibly tried to grab the knife during the attack. Police found a sheath of a Mora knife at the crime scene. The murder weapon itself was never located. The police did receive a knife found on a bus, however, but it was never determined if it was the same knife used in Elli's murder. Next to Elli's body, police discovered footprints of a person wearing large ski boots. Police also found tire tracks from a bicycle next to a nearby bush. Police interviewed more than 60 people in the following days, but none were charged. The tenant living upstairs in Elli's house told police that night she had heard a loud scream followed by a softer cry at around 9:45 p.m., and then everything went quiet. The tenant said she did not think much of it at the time. Police later found out that earlier that day, Elli had had a fight with another student. Elli had outed the student for charging extra money from the students for the class photographs, of which he was in charge. Elli brought the matter to the student union, and the student was asked to pay back the extra money to the students. The student reportedly had written a letter to Elli, which police later described as, quote, malicious. The student was questioned by police, but he had an alibi. Over the years, police interviewed hundreds of people, but none were ever considered a suspect. Police only ever named one suspect, Runar Holmström. Holmström had been charged for the Tule Latte campsite murders in 1959. Holmström was interviewed, but he denied killing Elli. He told police that during the winter of 1955 and 1956, he was at his home in Munsala. He said he only left to visit a dentist. However, he was unable to remember the name of that dentist. He said he made the trips on his bicycle. Police also asked him about the Mora knife that he owned. He could only remember that he had received the knife in September of 1959, but did not remember how he got it or from where. The sheath that he was using for the knife was also not the original Mora knife sheath, and when asked, he said again that he did not remember what happened to the original. Police asked him if anyone other than his family members could verify his whereabouts for the winter of 1955. Holmström said he had guests visiting his home, but when the police asked who these guests were, he could not remember their names. Holmström repeatedly denied any involvement in Elli's murder. He was never charged with her murder, and there have been no leads or any suspects in the case. It remains unsolved. Riina Makinen was a 19-year-old woman living in Helsinki, Finland. She had just graduated as a youth and leisure instructor and was looking for a permanent job. But on May 10, 2017, she vanished without a trace. She was last seen with a 32-year-old male, whose name has not been revealed to the public. This was a man she had met through a mutual acquaintance and had been dating for the past 2 months prior to her disappearance. According to police report, on the day of her disappearance, that man was driving his Opel Vectra in Mirskila when he saw a boat on a trailer parked in open farmland. He then decided to steal it. He then towed the trailer with the boat for more than 30 kilometers and parked it next to a remote radio tower on Hasgrove Road in Loviisa, Finland. He planned on returning to the trailer and boat later in the evening. Police say it is unclear why the man did not take the trailer with him and instead decided to leave it at the remote location. Investigators say that the man then headed to Helsinki and picked Riina up, at which time both headed to Loviisa to get the trailer, which had the boat on it.
According to the man's statement, on his way to get the boat with Riina, he realized that he had forgotten the location of the trailer and ended up lost in an isolated area. He claims that his car then got stuck in the mud and that he tried to get it out by accelerating with all the power the car had, but says that instead of freeing the car from the wet mud with this action, it somehow caused the car to catch fire. Riina and the man got out of the car and sought shelter behind a rock as the man had gun cartridges in the car, which had started to explode as the car was engulfed in flames. A man who had been walking his dog heard what he thought to be gunshots from rifles of deer hunters. At first, he thought it was simply a hunter shooting at a deer, but when the shots continued, he decided to check it out. Soon, he found the burnt car and the pair at the scene. The witness said that the man asked him if he had a car and if he could give them a ride. He refused as he did not feel safe letting them into his vehicle. He later told police that the woman had a glazed look on her face and seemed to be frightened. The witness left the scene and later called police himself. The police arrived at the scene about half an hour after the phone call, but found it to be empty. The pair seemed to have left the scene. The 32-year-old man would later be arrested while trying to steal candy from a gas station in Loviisa. However, Riina was not with him. The man was also carrying an unauthorized pistol with him at the time of his arrest, an FN Baby Browning. He had apparently hid the pistol on a shelf at the gas station when he saw the police coming. He told police he had bought the pistol for self-defense. Sometime around this time, Riina was reported missing after she had failed to return to her home. A massive search investigation was launched for her. The man was interrogated by police, and he told them that when they had arrived at the scene to investigate the burnt car on the day that Riina had disappeared, the pair had actually not left the scene but had been hiding all along. He said after the police left the scene, Riina had an argument with him regarding drugs and the situation itself. He said Riina then left him and walked in the direction of a nearby road. He claimed that he has not seen her since. He claims that he spent the night in the woods and that the next day he made his way to the gas station, and that's when police arrested him for stealing. The police checked CCTV cameras at the gas station and confirmed that the man was alone when he arrived. However, his actions in the hours prior to that are wholly unknown. The man had a criminal history, and 2 months after Riina disappeared, the man was convicted for 1 year in jail for at least 26 crimes that he'd committed between the years of 2016 and 2017. The long list of charges includes various thefts, burglaries, frauds, and drunk driving. Police investigated the area where the car was burnt and found Riina's makeup bag. Her phone was also found inside the car, but was too badly burnt to investigate. Police searched around the woods, but could not find any clues which would help them in their investigation. As there is no evidence directly linking him to Riina's disappearance, the man is not considered a suspect, but he has not been ruled out either. Over the years, numerous searches have been conducted in and around the area where Riina was last seen, but to no avail. Police have considered the possibility that Riina could have hitched a ride from the nearby road, but was then kidnapped. However, with no leads, the case remains open and unsolved. Marianne Rugaas Knutsen was a 6-year-old girl who lived with her family in Risør, a small town in Norway. Her mother, Orin, had recently given birth to a baby girl about 4 months prior. Her parents were divorced and her father lived in Kragerø. Her mother had started dating and had a new boyfriend with whom she had recently moved in. The family was happy and Marianne loved her new home, which had a large garden. On the 28th of August, 1981, Marianne got up and went to school. She had just started the 1st grade. School was short and ended around noon. Marianne decided to go to a friend's house to play and returned home later in the day. Upon her return, her mother, Orin, told her that she had to go to Arendal, which was about 50 kilometers away, to buy new curtains for the living room. Marianne said that she wanted to go with her, and Orin agreed. She then gave her some change and told her to get herself an ice cream before they left for Arendal. Marianne took the money and made her way to a small shop called Frydenvar Valhandel. The shop was only 340 meters away from her home, and she had gone to the shop alone several times prior. She bought the ice cream from the shop and ate it in the parking lot outside the store. She returned home to find her cousin, Nina, at her house. Nina came to look after Marianne's baby sister while Marianne and her mother were going to be away. Marianne then decided to stay at home with Nina and play. Before leaving, Orun gave Marianne some more money to buy ice cream and sweets for everyone later in the day. Orun left and the girls played for a while. At around 2:30 p.m., Marianne left again to buy ice cream for the second time. She made her way to the Frydendal Varhandel shop. She was barefoot and wearing a bright summer dress. She bought 2 ice creams and a bag of candies and left the store. This would be the last time she was seen alive. When her mother returned home and Marianne hadn't arrived, she reported her missing. An extensive search was carried out immediately. The families, volunteers, and police searched for the girl for the next few days, using helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras and cadaver dogs, but no trace of her would be found. It wasn't until 4 days later that police started questioning witnesses and started treating the case as a true crime. The police believed that Marianne may have been abducted in a car near the store. The police ramped up the search and the investigation, but to no avail. The search was officially called off on the 7th of September. During their investigation, police had multiple suspects, but none of them have ever been convicted. On October 16, 1981, a Vergashai man in his 50s was arrested and charged with Marianne's kidnapping. However, he was released the following year on June 22, 1982, due to lack of evidence. Marianne's father was also a suspect for a time, and police kept a close eye on him, but he was cleared soon after. In 1998, Thomas Quick confessed to abducting Marianne and killing her. He had confessed to at least 30 murders in Sweden and in Norway. He was convicted of 8 of these murders. However, he withdrew all of his confessions in 2008, and it was found that he had falsely confessed to all murders. He was incarcerated in a mental institution for personality disorder and was released in 2013. In 2017, private investigator Greta Stroma stated that the police made several errors during the investigation and demanded that the case be reopened. However, the Agder Police District rejected the request. Marianne's case has been reopened multiple times over the years, but none of the leads have ever panned out, and she remains missing to this day. It was an exciting night in Paderborn on the 20th of June 2006 as the FIFA World Cup tournament was in full swing. 21-year-old student nurse Frauke Liebs visited some friends at a local bar to watch a match between England and Sweden. Sometime before midnight, Frauke's phone ran out of battery, so she borrowed a friend's cell phone battery. Eventually, she returned the battery and began heading home at around 11 p.m. Her apartment from the bar was about 1.5 kilometers, and she decided to walk the distance on foot as she did not have enough money with her to catch a bus. Almost 2 hours later, at 12:49 a.m., Frauke's roommate, Christos, received a text message from her saying that she would be back later. However, Frauke never arrived home, and when she failed to show up for work, her mother reported her missing. Police tracked the location of the text message she sent to Christos and discovered that the message was sent from the small city of Nyheim, which was about 35 kilometers from Paderborn. In the days that followed, Frauke called her roommate 5 times from 5 different locations within Paderborn. The first call came the night after she disappeared, from an area south of Paderborn. In the call, she said, "Hello, Christos. I just wanted to tell you I'm fine. Tell Mom and Dad I'm fine." This was unusual since she used his full name rather than his nickname, Chris. In the next few days, Frauke continued to say that she would return home soon, but did not communicate any information about her situation. She provided only vague or even evasive answers to questions. During the last phone call, on June 27th, Frauke's sister spoke to her and later told police that Frauke had answered a faint yes when asked whether she was being held captive, and followed immediately by a loud no before the call abruptly ended. Neither Chris nor any of Frauke's other friends or family would ever hear from her again.
4 months later, on October 4th, a hunter discovered Frauke's skeletonized body in a wooded area near Lichtenau, about 20 kilometers from where she was last seen. The body was found with the clothes she was wearing on the day of her disappearance. Her phone, handbag, watch, and wallet were nowhere to be found. Due to the advanced decomposition of her body, no time or cause of death could be determined. There was no evidence or DNA found at the scene. Police later concluded that Frauke had been held captive for a while in Nieheim before being killed and her body dumped. Police believe the phone calls from Paderborn may have been a diversionary maneuver. In total, 900 people have been questioned by police, narrowed down to 5 initial suspects. However, they were soon cleared after they provided alibis. No arrests have been made in the death of Frauke Liebs, and the case remains unsolved. Tristan Brubach was born in 1984 in Frankfurt, Austria. He was the only child to his parents. Tristan went to Walter Koch Primary School up until 5th grade, after which he moved to a school in Sintlingen. Tristan grew up in difficult conditions. His mother was a drug addict who committed suicide when her son was only 10 years old. Tristan and his father continued to live in Frankfurt with Tristan's grandmother, soon moving in with them to look after the young boy. Tristan was described as a shy but very independent boy. He spent his time playing video games and tending to his pet rabbit. When he wasn't inside, he would spend time walking around his neighborhood all by himself, even though the area they lived in was known to be rough. During his preteen years, Tristan started to rebel. He even began smoking cigarettes in an effort to fit in with older children. However, he was still bullied by the other children in the neighborhood. On the 26th of March, 1998, Tristan woke up with a back pain and asked his father if he could visit a doctor, but his father told him to go to school first. Tristan would go to school that morning at around 9 a.m. after hanging out with a friend outside of the school premises. Later in the day, he asked his teacher if he could leave early to see a doctor as his back was hurting. He was granted permission and left his school at around 1:30 p.m. Tristan was last seen alive at Bruno Aschenlager, a park in front of Frankfurt Höchst railway station, at 3:20 p.m. His body would be discovered by his fellow classmates on their way back home. They returned to the school to tell their teachers, and the police were informed at 5 p.m. Tristan's body was lying in a pedestrian tunnel that runs alongside an underground section of the Liederbach River. He had been severely beaten, strangled, and his neck had a deep cut. Moreover, both of his testicles, as well as flesh from his buttocks and thighs, had been removed. The murder weapon was found next to the body. During their investigation, 3 teenagers claimed to have seen the murder taking place from a distance. However, they did not realize it at the time. They gave a description of the suspect, and a composite sketch was made. On the 7th of April, 1998, a man called in to the Frankfurt police station from a payphone in the Frankfurt Höchst train station, claiming that he had murdered Tristan. In the call, he said he planned on turning himself into the police and gave a description of his appearance, stating that he is roughly 180 centimeters tall, roughly 5'11", and had long black hair. He then ended the call with, "Arrest me." By the time police arrived at the train station, they could not find anyone by that description. The description he provided was different from the description provided by the 3 witnesses earlier. It is believed that the caller was trying to cloud the investigation by providing the wrong description. In March of 1999, Tristan's backpack was found in a forest in Niedenhausen, 25 kilometers from the crime scene. Inside the backpack, police found a road map of Germany in Czech language, which did not belong to Tristan. The police consequently expanded their inquiries to the Czech Republic and Slovakia, but no viable leads emerged. In October of 1999, an unknown person was digging 1.2 meters deep into Tristan's grave late at night. The coffin was not opened. He was never seen, there were no witnesses, but police think he was disturbed while digging and therefore left. In the year 2000, all males between the ages of 15 and 45 who lived or commuted near the vicinity of the murder were voluntarily asked to give their fingerprints, and more than 99% of the men in the area complied. Despite the investigation of several persons of interest and the large-scale investigation done by police, Tristan's case remains unsolved.
Justin Alexander Shelter, 35, quit his successful job at a tech startup company in order to travel full-time. He called it retiring, but it was more like reverting back to an earlier world. Relying on the knowledge he picked up after leaving high school at the age of 16 to study wilderness survival and the art of karate, he traveled 18,000 miles across the western side of the United States. Justin experienced a significant setback in Sun Valley, Nevada, where he mistakenly trusted a stranger to provide him shelter and a much-needed shower, and instead had all of his belongings stolen by a man who was actually part of a group of meth heads. After that loss, Justin set out to discover a more simple life. Already with no possessions, he decided to go to the extreme. For his new life, he traveled to India and wore a simple bark loincloth, went hunting alongside indigenous tribes, and all the while traced the path of the ancient god of Shiva. His blog, Adventures of Justin, chronicles a life many commented they envied, posting pictures of his treks in the snow wearing duct tape sandals and living in caves. Justin would caption pictures with statements such as, quote, going tribal with the Metawani of Indonesia, and, quote, I'm free to live the life of my dreams. But those posts came to an end with the last one, posted on August 19th, 2016, reading in part, quote, a sadhu has invited me on a pilgrimage high in the Himalayas to meditate. I ran out of money and food, so he fed me each time I passed. He invited me along on his pilgrimage. 3 days hard trek to a lake at 13,000 feet, and then 10 days meditating in a spiritual retreat, end quote. Justin described the sadhu's eyes as, quote, 5,000 years old. And those eyes were one of their only forms of communication, as this guru was supposedly a mute. Due to a post on Justin's Instagram referencing these sadhus, or gurus, his family has reason to be concerned that this man had a hand in Justin's disappearance. Justin wrote on his post, they can bless or curse. Police won't arrest them, even for murder, which happens, I'm told. I've been cold, damp, and hungry a lot recently, and feeling a bit malnourished and weak already. I should return in mid-September or so. If I'm not back by then, don't look for me. Justin's willingness to go into rough mountainous terrain of Himachal Pradesh, North India, despite a back injury that was flaring up, a vitamin deficiency, and a general fatigue, shows a man so determined to find a higher truth that he risks dying to find it. This particular area was a draw to him, as it was believed to have been the meditation location of the son of the god Shiva, who meditated there for 3,000 years. Additionally, the hot springs there were said to have healing properties. Justin left with the Nepalese Naga Baba, named Satya Narayan Rawat, on or around August 24th. And on September 3rd, he was seen coming back down from the Montalai Lake, going towards a village by some tourists. They said Justin was walking alone, and that the guru had walked past a few hours earlier. The hikers offered Justin, who looked haggard and unwell, some food and a respite from his trek, but he was highly determined to reach his belongings, which were stored in the village below. Justin's Instagram post about the gurus being untouchable by police was proven untrue, as upon Justin's family sounding the alarm, the police did end up arresting the guru that he traveled with on October 15th, 6 weeks after Justin was last seen. Police interrogated the guru for 8 days, at which point they left him alone for but a few minutes, only to come back to the room to find he had hanged himself, using the only thing he had on him, his torn and dirty loincloth. Many followers of his ideology say it was not guilt but embarrassment that caused this guru to take his life upon being questioned about his missing hiking partner. Despite forensic teams combing the countryside and rough terrain for any sign of Justin or his remains, they found nothing. Some think Justin had a fall and crawled into some sort of ditch or ravine to wait to be found, while others believe he encountered foul play from either the guru or some other person unknown. Others comment on the area's reputation for being a popular hashish destination, enticing Western tourists with hash-fueled enlightenment, which can bring with it a potentially criminal enterprise. Justin may have been in the wrong place at the wrong time or witnessed a drug deal gone bad. Justin is still missing to this day, and his family has spent considerable time and energy looking for him.